Welcome to our crucial conversation luncheon today on a very important topic. As you know very well, the issue of the intersection between public safety and law enforcement and public policy has been very much in the news these days. I think our third speaker has just arrived, I'm happy to say. It's getting better all the time. James, thanks for coming. Obviously, just in the last day, we've had a lot of controversy. The last day or two, we've had a lot of controversy in our state surrounding the intersection of public policy and law enforcement. We've had a bit of a kerfluffle around the issue of highway patrol enforcement of trucking regulations that perhaps might have been related to a campaign contributor to the governor. We've also had the issue, of course, of the governor taking a stance yesterday in expressing his opposition to settling Syrian refugees in North Carolina, just a couple of days after he said there was no problem with that, nothing to worry about. So obviously it's always an issue that's front and center in our country, but of course, as many of you also know, a front page article in the New York Times once again shined a bright light on a troublesome and long-standing problem in North Carolina. That is, of course, discriminatory policing that targets people of color for unfair treatment. And according to the article, which was entitled "The Disproportionate Risks of Driving While Black," an examination of traffic stops and arrests in Greensboro, North Carolina, uncovered wide racial differences in measure after measure of police conduct. People of color are disproportionately stopped and searched by police, quote, even though they found drugs and weapons significantly more often when the driver was white, unquote. Since the release of the Times article a couple weeks ago, responses have been mixed. Many, including major newspapers, civil rights advocates, have called for new reforms and policy changes. Others, including some political leaders, have rejected the article's findings and denied that change is necessary. The city of Greensboro, quite happily, has announced some important reforms, and I believe we have City Attorney Tom Carruthers here from Greensboro. I saw him. There he is right there, as well as several law enforcement officers from that city, and Chapel Hill, Fayetteville. And so this has the promise to be a really productive session today. And we're going to take a closer look at this important subject with three of the state's leading experts. And they are, to my right here, we have, going right to left, Frank Baumgartner is the Richard J. Richardson Distinguished Professor of Political Science at UNC Chapel Hill. Professor Baumgartner has conducted extensive research and written at length about the issue of race, with particular focus on the death penalty and on traffic stops. To his left is Chief Harold Medlock, the Chief of Police of the City of Fayetteville. And since assuming office in 2013, he has effected a transformation in how his department conducts business in an effort to end discriminatory targeting of people of color. He was quoted in the New York Times article. And to his left is James Williams, who has served as the public defender for Orange and Chatham counties since 1990. He's helped lead multiple efforts in and out of government to address the issue of racial bias in the justice system.
It's a pleasure to be able to address this topic. I hesitate to say it's a pleasure. I think it's an uncomfortable topic for everybody. It certainly puts members of our police forces on the defensive, and I regret that. I think it's a topic that has to be understood, and our state actually was the first state in the nation to mandate the collection of comprehensive data on every traffic stop. And that was in 1999 when the topic of quote unquote driving while black or brown surged onto the national agenda. So the slide that I have here is very simply an overview of our traffic stops data, which are current, my version, just out of laziness. I haven't updated it, but I plan to update it at the end of in spring 2016. There's 16 million traffic stops through 2013, 10 million tickets, citations, 500,000 searches, 350,000 arrests, and 128,000 contraband hits. This is statewide for every agency, every police agency that's required to report. So that's an overview. So you can see that searches occur about 3% of the time. We know the reason why the individual was pulled over. Was it driving while impaired, a seatbelt, speed limit violation, etc.? And I just want to bring your attention to the overall number, 31% black. But those numbers, that percentage of black drivers differs quite substantially from about 22% black for driving while impaired to almost 40% for regulatory and equipment violations. And this is at the core of something that I think is really interesting that Chief Medlock, I think, will follow up on, and which has been discussed, that police supervisors and chiefs have the ability to direct their officers to focus on certain kinds of traffic issues rather than others. And I think that and I'm going to show you, that to the extent that we focus on real traffic safety issues such as speeding, driving while impaired, and running stop signs, we see a different pattern in the racial characteristics of who gets stopped and who gets searched following those stops. The very simplest data here show that whites are searched 2.6% of the time, blacks 4.5%, so there's a 75% increased likelihood of search across the state for black drivers. And there's a 43% increased likelihood that they'll be arrested if the driver is black. There's a 5% decreased likelihood that they'll get a ticket. A ticket is a relatively good outcome following a traffic stop, so that's more likely to occur to the white driver than the black. These tendencies are sharper among men than among women. The racial disparities are always stronger among men. The 97% increased likelihood for a black man to be searched compared to a white male driver, and that differs by the type of search that may have been conducted. And we also can see the likelihood that the driver who was searched is found with contraband. And I just want to bring your attention to the consent searches and the probable cause searches statewide. As the New York Times reported for the city of Greensboro, black drivers are less likely to have contraband for consent searches. But I want to focus my attention on the following slide, which well, not even this one. It shows that those trends are actually increasing over time. The racial disparities in traffic stops and the likelihood of being searched are moving in what I think we would all understand to be the wrong direction. Disparities are going up. This is hard to understand, but let me plead for your patience for just a few seconds as I explain. When we control for whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, how old you are, why you got stopped, whether you got pulled over by an officer who has a high disparity in the racial characteristics of whom that particular officer searches, what time of day it was, what day of the week it was. When we control for all those things, in the first column we see the likelihood that you'll be searched. And the numbers represent the difference from 1.0 ratio of being searched. So the black driver is 75% more likely to be searched, controlling for all those other factors. Now the biggest predictor of being searched is driving while impaired. And I would just say, thank goodness. But controlling for why you got stopped, what time of day it was, who stopped you, controlling for all those things, there's still an unexplained racial disparity of 75%. For getting a ticket, there's an 8% disparity, and for being arrested, controlling for all those other things, including whether or not they found contraband in your car, there's still a 51% unexplained racial disparity. So I think that we can question all we want about the validity of the data. We can question why does this occur, but we should not be questioning anymore in this state whether this occurs. This occurs. There is a very, very substantial racial disparity. Now, why does it occur? This is getting really to the point that I think Chief Medlock will follow up on. We can predict the likelihood that a black and white driver will be searched. And this analysis focuses on individual police officers in Charlotte. I did it in Charlotte just because it's the biggest city, it's got the most data, but I could replicate this for any city. So what's the likelihood that a black or a white driver will be searched? Well, how many searches of the other race did that particular officer search? So for a white driver, for every black driver that he searches at 0.67 white drivers. But then you can see that almost no particular type of pattern of searches predicts the likelihood that they'll search the white driver. On the other hand, there's a number of types of traffic stops. To the extent that that officer engages in more of those traffic stops, such as equipment violations, if that officer has done 2,000 traffic stops, and 30% of those traffic stops have been for equipment violations, each increase in 1% of equipment violations increases by a statistically significant proportion the likelihood that they'll search a black driver, controlling for how often they search white drivers. So we can use these numbers and look at what predicts no difference, which is speeding and stop signs. Those are non-significant coefficients close to zero. And we can look at the ones that are really substantially high, which are seatbelt, investigations, regulatory, equipment, and safe movement. Strangely, driving while impaired reduces the likelihood that a black driver will be searched, and it's really the only very highly significant variable that predicts that the white driver will be searched. So that's a puzzle, and I'm going to leave it at that to allow the other experts on the panel some time to explain these stranger than true statistics that come out of our North Carolina traffic stop data. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank, and thank you for allowing me to be here. First, let me tell you, I'm no expert. I'm just a worn-out old cop. Okay, been doing this a long time, and to double your pleasure, double your fun, I spent the majority of my career in Charlotte, so I'm contributing all the way through. So let me tell you a story, if I could. After I got to Fayetteville, my wife joined a Bible study. Citywide Bible study. It's non-denominational, non-racial. We're a city, interestingly, in Fayetteville of a lot of military veterans. The neighborhoods are pretty diverse. So we don't have truly black and truly white neighborhoods for the most part in our city. But my wife went to a get to know you kind of thing for the Bible study early on in our time there, and they were going around introducing one another. And by the way, this Bible study starts at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning. That means that I get up with my wife at 4 in the morning every Friday. So we've been doing that since we've been there, and I'm glad to do it. But anyway, my wife is there, Gloria's there, and they're going around the room, and it's a little bit after 5 on this Friday morning. And there's a black lady about 3 down from Gloria who introduces herself, and she is visibly upset. She's in her 60s. And she says, "I'm sorry, my voice is trembling a little bit. I'm a little bit upset because on the way to Bible study this morning," she said, "I pulled out of my driveway, went up to the stop sign, made a left in my neighborhood, and a police car stopped me." Now, how many have seen that commercial that's on now where people's heads blow up and the purple stuff comes out? Okay, that's what you're getting ready to see me do. She said she made the left onto the street, and a Fayetteville police car came up behind her and turned the blue lights on. And the officer said, "Ma'am, you didn't stop at the stop sign." And being a mid-60s-year-old lady, she said, "Officer, I'm sorry. I thought I did, and if I didn't, I apologize." And he said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to a Bible study over at Village Baptist Church." And the officer's response was this. Nobody in this neighborhood goes to Bible studies, and I don't believe there's any Bible study that's going on in this city at 5 o'clock in the morning. I tried to find out who that was. I tried to find out who that was, and I couldn't. So the officer let her go, didn't write the ticket, and I'm still trying to track down who he is, and I will find him, okay? But that is an indication of some of the thought process that cops go through. And listen, I am one, and I'm going to indict me and others as I share with you some of the things that I've learned as a cop and also as a chief. People expect us to hold down crime, and so they expect us to be in the neighborhoods. Well, that's what Fayetteville tried to do for several years before I was hired there in early 2013. And so the cops were in the neighborhoods, the cops were very assertive, and as a result, because of their work in the neighborhoods with a lot of regulatory stops, stopping cars for taillights being out, tags being expired, inspection stickers being out, windshield being broken, a rear view mirror being off the window, those stops were made and consent searches were done. And I've been around this business for a long time, and I can tell you, I can get consent from you on a traffic stop. I can. I just have to work it long enough. I can get consent from any of you here on a traffic stop. I just have to work you a little bit. The fact is, we weren't getting that much off of the consent searches. Crime was continuing to rise in the city. People were mad at the cops were mad at people, and as a result, my predecessor decided to retire. The city manager was asked to go find employment elsewhere, and two really great cops in the back of the room here, Chief Chuck Kimball, who is now the police chief of Fayetteville State, one of my assistant chiefs formerly, and Captain James Nolet lived through what is now known in Fayetteville as driving while black and a consent search issue. There was a lot of anger between the citizens and the cops. There was a lot of anger between the cops at the citizens, and we weren't talking. So after I was hired, I started to do what I've been taught to do, and that is get out in the community, start meeting people. One of the first groups that I invited to come visit with me was the NAACP. And Mr. Jimmy Buxton and several of his leadership came, we visited, he shared with me the concerns. And really what it came down to was they felt like we were targeting African Americans on traffic stops. That was a theme that resonated over and over for the first 6 or 8 months of my time in Fayetteville. So what we started to look at was the data. What does the information show? And the fact is, we weren't getting a lot of contraband off of traffic stops. We weren't getting a lot of guns, illegal guns off of traffic stops. Crime was up. We had some serious robbery problems in our city. We had some serious burglary problems in our city. And no one was satisfied. The cops weren't, and the community wasn't. And so we started as a police department to change the way we do business. Here's what I did. I asked my cops to quit making what I call regulatory stops. Regulatory stop is the tag at the window and the registration and all that mess. Don't make the stop. First, get out of the neighborhood, because people aren't dying in car crashes in the neighborhoods. Get on the thoroughfares, get on the 4-lane, the 6-lane roads, and write people for speeding, for stop sign violations, and stoplight violations. We had more people killed in Fayetteville in 2012 from car crashes than we did from gun violence and murders. So I wanted to do something about that, because people tend to forget that a life lost in a car crash is still a life lost. We grieve people who are murdered. We don't grieve so much as a community people are killed in car crashes. So in 2012, I think we had something like 29 people killed in car crashes. I told my folks, I didn't write anything down. I simply started meeting with my officers, my command staff, and just driving into them. I don't want you making regulatory stops. Focus on the moving violation. Get out of the neighborhood. If we're turning blue lights on the major thoroughfares around the neighborhoods, the bad guys aren't going to want to go there because they see the blue lights and they go, you know what, it's hot in here. So we're doing the right thing by slowing people down, keeping them alive, and the bad guys see the blue lights and they're not brain surgeons, they go somewhere else. So we just turn the lights on and the cockroaches go away. And that's what the whole blue light thing is. So in 2012, we had 29 traffic fatalities. 2013, my traffic stops went just like this. You know why? We're going to show the chief. The heck with him. We just won't make traffic stops. So the traffic stops they made were moving violations, but my traffic stops went in the toilet. You know who complained the loudest about traffic citations being down in 2013? Defense attorneys. I love that. I love that. Our defense bar in the city complained because we weren't writing enough citations. That's the same crowd that was leading the charge on you're stopping people because they're black. We didn't do it intentionally. I think it was my cops saying, you know what, we need to step back, see if this new guy that's in the department is crazy or what, and a little bit of we'll show him. And so our productivity in traffic violations went down. At the end of 2013, continued to drive home the fact that we had 29 fatalities in 2012, we had 25 in 2013, 2014, we had 20. So now the work is showing that we're saving lives. And folks, Frank and I had this conversation. I believe that traffic enforcement is exclusive to a great degree of crime control. Traffic enforcement is to keep people alive. You may prove me to be crazy, okay? I'm near retirement, I can go away crazy. But I believe that the work that we're doing from 2012 to 13, 13 to 14, and now 14 to 15, where we've had 12 traffic fatalities, traffic homicides, or traffic fatalities. 2 of those were suicides, where people intentionally walked in front of vehicles. Well, we've had 14 this year versus 19 same time last year. So the work that we're doing is producing results and keeping people alive. Likewise, our complaints have gone down. Our searches have gone down because now we have a written consent search form that the officers have to have somebody sign to search their vehicle. But we're not about trying to get in somebody's car with our traffic stops for traffic violations. We're about trying to keep people alive. So our complaints, our external complaints have gone down. And I believe that we're gonna continue to be able to impact this in a great way. By the way, now, we're making in our department 1,000, an average of 1,200 traffic stops every week. And our fatalities are going down. I hope that our minor crashes are going to go down. We're still trying to figure that out, but I know this, the major problems that we're having on the major thoroughfares where so many of our young people are killing themselves, and I don't mean killing themselves intentionally, I mean being killed in car crashes. I think we're starting to have a positive impact, and our community is supporting those efforts. I have had a number of people over the last 6 months come up and say, Chief, you got the nicest police officers. That's reassuring for a cop, a top cop to hear. And I had one lady a few weeks ago who came up, a black lady, she came across at a community event. She said, Chief, I need to tell you something about one of your cops. I went, oh, here we go. There's going to be a complaint. And she said, I want you to know that Officer so-and-so is the nicest police officer I've ever met. He stopped me the other day on Strickland Bridge Road for speeding. And she said, you know what, he was the nicest man, the nicest police officer I've ever met. And I said, well, that's really great. She said, I want you to tell him that I told you this. I said, yes, ma'am, I will. And then I said, because I drew a conclusion, I said, well, I guess he didn't write you a ticket. She goes, oh no, he wrote me a ticket, but he was the nicest man. And I'm like, we're winning. So the relationship between our community is improving. The work that we're doing together When we have now a community or a neighborhood who says, Chief, we've got speeding in our neighborhood, guess what we do? We go in there and spank them for speeding. And the community appreciates it. What we always tell the neighborhood is, if you call us in for a stop sign for speeding violations in your neighborhood, just remember, we're probably gonna write one of your families, because they're part of the problem. And you know what? Folks don't complain about it. But more importantly, our officers are starting to feel more fulfilled about their work. Now, I'm gonna give you another observation, because I come from a time where we didn't have computers in the car when I started. And I don't have any data to back this up. But I've worked when we didn't have computers in the car, and I've worked when we did have computers in the car. And here's what I'll tell you, we've got a great tool for our officers to use in those cars. The problem is, if they're not monitored properly, they run the risk of misusing them. And so here's what I'll tell you, I know happened in my department. I don't have any data on this, but I know that it happened. You have an officer that pulls up at a 6-lane road, 3 lanes in that officer's direction, and there are 3 cars in front of him or her. And they can reach over on that laptop and they can run all 3 tags. And they're playing the lottery. And they're making a stop on, in a lot of cases, the person who they think is going to cause them the least amount of trouble. That may not have the attorney that can go and represent them in court. And so now you have that issue of, you really are targeting particular individuals. That's why I want to get away from regulatory stops. We have to start enforcing traffic laws for the purpose of keeping people alive. The other thing that has happened as a result of the consent search decree that our city council gave, I think it's a good thing, is that officers who do conduct probable cause searches actually have better cases in court. So that there's something that they observed in that car when they made that traffic stop that gave them the probable cause to do a search. And they can articulate that in court. And it's a lot harder to overcome that by an attorney. And it also gives our officers more experience and more training and more reason that they can legitimately say, this is why I did what I did. And then the last thing I want to tell you is this. And none of this is written down. These are things that I've just pushed at my people. There's a charge called resist, obstruct, and delay on the books in North Carolina. Some of you may know it as resist, delay, and obstruct an officer. I have stopped my officers, for the most part, from using that as an only charge for arrest. That's also known, resist, obstruct, and delay, in my world is also known as contempt of conduct. When we stopped officers from, now they can charge it in addition to something else. In other words, I'm going to put my hands on you. If I put my hands on this gentleman and he blows up and begins to resist me because I have a charge, who didn't turn their cell phone? Because I have an arrestable charge and he resists me, he's going to be charged for resist, obstruct, and delay as well. But I'm not going to walk up to him just because he called me an SOB and say, you know what, you're under arrest for resist, obstruct, and delay. Because being called, as a cop, being called an SOB is your First Amendment right. I'm looking forward to regaining my First Amendment rights when I retire. But what I'm telling you is that that single charge by itself caused more uses of force, caused more desperate resisting incidents than the charge or the reason we were out with the officer, the individual to begin with. So we've made some changes, and I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of the things that I'm doing aren't necessarily popular with my peers. I'm okay with that because my peers aren't paying my salary. And Frank and I were talking before this. It may come to pass, as I've said to you earlier, it may come to pass that everything I'm doing is wrong and somebody's going to call me crazy. But for the last 2 years, we have experienced double-digit decreases in crime. Last year, we experienced a double-digit decrease in violent crime. And folks, that's in Fayetteville, North Carolina. No matter what you think of our city, it's a great city, but it's got a bad reputation for violence. And we're showing great gains because the community now is coming alongside us. 151 different neighborhood watches that are active, that we meet with regularly, that are helping us to work through crime and deal with issues to prevent crime. I'm not an expert. I've just been doing it a long time. I've been beat up, and I'm still trying to learn the best way to do this business. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank Chief Medlock because what he has done coming into a situation in the city of Fayetteville that was really volatile, what he has done, I think, has begun to really change the conversation about fair and equitable policing in the state of North Carolina, and allows us to begin to have a conversation, a serious conversation with other agencies that yes, you can police in a fair and unbiased way and maintain public safety. In fact, my position is to do it the other way hampers public safety because it impairs people's willingness to trust and cooperate with the police if they feel that they are being mistreated, especially if they feel that that mistreatment has its roots in racial bias. I'm not an expert either. I didn't get into this by way of a concern about race and policing per se. I became involved in issues related to race and criminal justice about 5 years ago. And that was my focus, racial inequities within the criminal justice system. And it was in that regard that I was on the Board of Governors of the North Carolina Advocates for Justice and encouraged and moved them to create a task force addressing issues of race and criminal justice. And I chaired that task force, and one of the earlier things that we did was to form some work groups or committees, and one of those committees was a data committee. And we knew that North Carolina, as Frank mentioned, had a data collection traffic stop statute. We also knew that up to that point, this was 2010, 2011, the data within that data set, which may have been, 8, 9 million, 10 million stops at that point, had not been fully analyzed by anybody. There had been an analysis in, I believe, 2004 of the highway patrol stops, but not an analysis of the entire database. And we knew that Frank Baumgartner was a highly sophisticated and well-respected social scientist who knew how to analyze data, and that we knew that he was a good public citizen. And so we asked him if he would analyze this database for us, for the task force. And so we signed him to a contract. Not really. He volunteered to do it. And so the analysis, for the first time, we had a view of basically a decade of traffic stops in the state of North Carolina from various departments across the state, and we're able to see the disparities in terms of race, not just in terms of who was stopped, but what happened after the stop. And that was a particular concern because some of the numbers that stood out most to me were the numbers related to the consent searches. The other thing that was of value with that is that there was some criticism of the analysis early on that, and I think probably so, related to the stops themselves, because they said we didn't have any, what do you call those points of reference? reference points related to the total. Yeah, stop. But we did have with the searches, so the questions that may have been raised with the validity of the analysis as it related to the consent searches were not legitimate, because we did have a reference point for the consent searches, and that was just the data set of all people stopped. So long story short is, when you look at that data, we looked at that data, and we looked at that report, and we used that report to go to criminal justice stakeholders to say, look, this is of concern. We don't know exactly why these numbers are as they are, but it surely is disturbing that people of color, particularly African Americans, are being not only stopped disproportionately along our streets and highways, but also being searched, and their outcomes are significantly racially skewed. And we say in this country, and I believe we do, that we value liberty and we value equality, and there's something not right about this. And so we were able to use those reports to convince the criminal justice stakeholders to create a commission on race and criminal justice. And so now we have the North Carolina Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparity. And one of the concerns and one of the areas that we'll be looking into is this whole traffic stops data piece. And Chloe Johnson, our project manager, is seated right there at that table. But when the thing about what makes traffic stops and the concern about racial profiling or disparate policing so critical is that who is stopped and how they are treated once stopped conveys powerful messages about citizenship and race in this country. And people who feel that they are being stopped based upon improper reasons like race, or that they've been racially profiled, come away feeling sometimes angry, humiliated, demeaned, and with young guys in particular, emasculated. It is and quite often, these things don't get talked about. It is talked about as if it is just a minor inconvenience and get over it already. The police are just out there doing their jobs, and so let's just let them do their jobs. But it is much more significant than that, because it is a part of, you hear a lot of talk about, you hear your presidential candidates talking about mass incarceration. One of the drivers is the phenomenon that people of color are more likely to have contacts with police encounters, and those encounters, if they are being asked for permission to be searched disproportionately, then that's going to lead to disproportionate numbers of people of color entering our criminal justice systems. And that has ramifications for our democracy. We know what the numbers are as it relates to mass incarceration and race in this country. So I'm glad that we're at a point where there are leaders in policing, in the police community, who are now beginning to say, okay, it's time to stop quibbling about the data. The data has been analyzed not just by Frank Baumgardner. The major chiefs of police had a data analyst of their own to analyze the data, which didn't differ in any significant regards from the analysis and the results that Professor Baumgardner had achieved. And so the numbers speak for themselves. And so then the question becomes, and I think it was raised, well, why is that? There could be any number of factors, and I won't stand here and attempt to answer all of those, but part of it, I think, is related to deployment. And when I say deployment, I don't say that to justify, and I don't think departments should use that as a simple justification or rationalization of the fact that people of color, especially black people, are experiencing policing in a significantly different way than white citizens are. And the deployment argument usually goes like this. Well, we have more police officers in communities where people of color live, and that's as a result of call for services, and that's usually as far as the conversation goes. I mean, and I think, from my perspective, that is too easy a justification or rationalization for, I think, a significant infringement on people's rights and freedoms. And so then the question becomes, well, does that really justify or explain, for instance, the disparities in the rates at which you are searching people if it's simply a deployment issue? And I don't think it really does. And also it raises the question of what costs are you willing to pay for this sort of deployment if you are also alienating people who you really need to help you keep people safe. So if you're paying a price for this deployment practice, then it's time to reevaluate that, because I think a lot of criminal justice experts, criminologists, and others will question whether that is the most effective way to maintain public safety if you end up alienating a number of the people within the community that you really need to have come to you when crimes occur and things of that nature. So I think that's another conversation that needs to take place. Another issue that I think contributes to the disparity is implicit bias and unconscious racism, which is something that impacts all of us. And that is a message, again, that those of us who have been trying to raise this issue have been trying to get across. I think too often, especially early on, those in the law enforcement community, took offense and assumed that advocates were accusing them of being racist if one raised the question, and we tried to say, no, it's not that. It's not that we're accusing anybody of being racist. We are saying that that race may be playing a factor unbeknownst to you, just like it impacts, I think what a judge would do on the bench, or like it might impact me as a criminal defense attorney. Implicit bias impacts all of our decision-making process. And unless you, first of all, acknowledge that and become aware of that and factor that into your institution, your structure, your business, so that you can guard against that, then we will be destined to constantly repeat this script. And so it's good that a number of the departments are now beginning to have trainings by fair and impartial policing entities like Laurie Friedell's group and a number of others across the nation to help their officers recognize that you don't have to be a bad person to have race impact how you might carry out your duties. And there are a number of different ways that it might impact, in policing when somebody is stopped on the street. Who you think, what you decide to be probable cause or reasonable suspicion might be impacted by the race of the person that you stopped, and you not even be aware of it. Because one of the things that most studies have shown is that there's more of a presumption of guilt or suspicion of dangerousness or criminality if a person is black than otherwise. And so just simply being aware of those things, I think, is important. And I do know that several departments, a number of departments across the state, have begun that process of the training to help address implicit bias and unconscious racism. And so one of the things I talk about liberty and equality, and years ago, in fact, centuries ago, and I can't remember his name, a former slave who was an abolitionist, said that the price of liberty and equality is eternal vigilance. I mean, that was true then, and that is true now. I think we have to be continually alert be able and willing to work together in a collaborative fashion to address what is a nationwide problem, and not be fearful. I mean, this fear of and reluctance to talk about and engage on issues of race is something that hopefully we can overcome and be more comfortable having these conversations, and I think everyone will benefit in the long run.